All right. Hello, everybody. Good morning. If you're here, please turn on your cameras so we could get started. Let's see how to. Okay, we have. Okay. So today we're going to talk about experiments and experimental research, which is going to be the last method we cover in our class on research methods. So we've covered already the qualitative ones that are interviews, focus groups, and ethnographies. And we covered the first part of the quantitative methods, which was the survey method. And now we're doing experiments, which is related and very similar to surveys in one way in terms of like taking the measurements, but they're different in also many different ways. So I'm sure all of you have heard the term experiment, used the term experiments, seen experiments, maybe did experiments in high school. So just without giving any like a formal definition or something, when I say experiments, what does that mean to you? Could anyone share? What does experiment, the term experiment, mean to you? One. Like what terms come to mind when we say experiments? What idea, what concept you get when you hear experiments? Oh, yeah, testing hypothesis. Yeah, make me think of a science class, right? Yeah, so about testing hypothesis. So experiments, what differentiates experiments from anything else, the idea that you're testing something. That's what makes it different than a survey or interview. So experimentation, all experiments are always about you are changing something, you're playing with something, you're mixing something, you're manipulating something in order to see what would be the effect, right? Uh, so the formal definition, experiments are a test under controlled conditions. And this is a very key distinction made to either demonstrate the truth, examine the validity of hypothesis, that is testing a hypothesis, or determine the efficacy of something previously tried. And as you've all witnessed, like through the last year, people were trying to figure out, not regular people like scientists and pharmaceutical companies and governments, etc., finding a vaccine for the COVID-19. And so they would do experiments, and simply those experiments were, okay, a group of scientists came up with the vaccine, they tried it on like lab rats and like testing the safety and whatnot, and we want to look at the efficacy of it or how effective it is. And so they gathered like a group of people who took the vaccine, and then another group of people who did not take the vaccine. And so they compared if, yeah, the group of people who got the vaccine were witnessed like low infection rate, absence of symptoms, low hospitalization, low infection, everything, right? And depending on that, we say the experiment worked because all of these metrics the scientists were looking at dropped, okay? So they introduced a manipulation of the biology, obviously, which is a new vaccine entering your body. and it changed the outcome, right? Hence, they tested if the ability of that vaccine to work as a block for the COVID-19 infection, right? So that's like about the efficacy, examine the validity of hypothesis. So you're saying, right, so the thing about masking, right? So hypothesis is, because we know the virus travel through aerosols, right? That's would wearing mask block that. So you compare communities, you do an experiment, right? You let one community or people in a room wear mask, another group don't wear mask, and you compare. Obviously, there are some ethical problem with that, but you get the larger picture, right? So it's about showing what mechanism work in whatever thing, right? And always the idea under control condition, and so that you're isolating other factors that could affect the outcomes, right? And hence it's under control condition. To give an example from our field of communication, you were saying, so one, let's say I came up with an advertisement idea, and I said, you could induce people to exercise more if you show them regular people exercising rather than fitness models, right? So that's, let's say, my hypothesis, right? We would conduct an experiment on that under control condition. What control condition means is that we'll bring one group of people, and they would only see that ad or those commercial or those posts or those Instagram pictures or what have you. They would only see the pictures by regular people, and then another group would only see the pictures by the fitness models. That's what we mean by control condition. We basically isolated any external exposure, right? Because if it's conducted in if it's conducted in if it's conducted in an open environment, right? So we just posted those posts on Instagram. We cannot tell if people were exposed to both or just one of them, right? The one with the regular people and the one with the fitness. We cannot tell. So that's a lack of control. So under control condition, it means we know and we control which groups see which materials or not, right? And it's always the idea that you want to compare the results. And so ideally, your intervention should work to change the outcome in the way your hypothesis has predicted. And so the difference between experimentation, the main difference between experimentation, let's say a survey, is that you have a manipulation of a variable. And that's the key difference. And so it's not, for instance, there's a survey about your optimism about joining the workforce, or finding a job next year when you graduate, right? Or for example, your level of satisfaction with remote learning. That's just a survey. And experimentation, we would change something. And so I will, let's say, introduce a webinar, or a 1 week intensive course. And I say, when people take this, let's say, webinar or a seminar or something, they would feel more confident about joining the labor force, or they would have better chances to land a job. So because I introduce certain skills, allow them to give them more ability to develop their resumes, better interviewing skills, more confident in demonstrating their abilities, etc., etc. That's a manipulation. Okay, there's a new variable, or the one variable that's being changed by the researcher. Hence, it's an experiment. And so if we're comparing this group to another group, we call that an experimental design, right? There's some intervention. And why we do that the reason we do experimentation in communication research and in any other field for that matter is to find a causal relationship. Does anyone remember the 3 conditions for establishing causality? I know we covered this in the first third of the semester, but there are 3 conditions that allow us to say one factor causes the other, or like that X causes Y. There were 3 conditions. Could you remember any one of them? When can we say that X causes Y? Ideas?
All the other possibilities have to be kind of dismissed. Like it has to be that the variable is the only thing that can be causing.
Yeah, that's a very good one, everyone. So that's the last one, the third one. So you say, yeah, and it's to show that all of the other explanation or possibilities are ruled out, and it's that X is the one, or like the independent variable you have, is the one causing Y, or the outcome variable you're looking at. But even before that, that assumes what? That X and Y are the word?
That somehow X and Y are associated.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. That X and Y are correlated, right? So, or like they change together. So when X changes, Y changes, right? And so these are, so these are the conditions to remind. So first, X must precede Y in time, right? So something must precede the other. And you can establish that by let's say like a longitudinal survey, right? And so to give you an example, we say, for example, like if productivity increase or decrease for people who like use TikTok, right? So this, we can do a survey. So like we measure your level of productivity before you download and use TikTok, and then 3 months, 6 months after, and we see, right? So we don't need an experiment. We just like look at people like at 2 points in time. X and Y must covary together. Again, we can establish this also by surveys. So like people who like do outdoor activities indicate they have like better satisfaction with life. Okay, so that's just a correlation. Number 3, that Evelyn has mentioned, must demonstrate Y was caused by X and not by a third variable, and that is to say, we rule out a different alternatives. And this one could only be demonstrated by conducting an experiment, right? Because we don't know, because if you're just showing 1 or 2, you cannot say for sure that those 2 things, X and Y, were caused by a third variable. And to remind you, I always like to give the example because it's easy, about the ice creams and shark attacks. Remember that one, right? So and it's very simple. So the idea is that people visit the beach more during the summer, hence shark attacks also increase as a rate. And when people go out like under the sun, they would tend to purchase like more ice creams. So ice cream like increases as well. And so if we are just looking into, okay, so let's try to apply those conditions. So yeah, like shock attacks started to increase in first weeks of May, and then ice cream sales started to increase second week of May. So that's X preceded Y, okay. X and Y must converge together. So yeah, we see shark attacks increasing and ice cream sales are increasing. But then third one must demonstrate Y caused by X and not by Z. Yeah, there are other alternatives that make more sense, which is that it's just the summer, the weather affected both the ice cream sales and the like people being more exposed to shark attacks. Hence, yeah, we ruled out that when people hear about shark attacks, they buy more ice cream, right? Could be, but it's not the most plausible explanation, right? So with experiments, to bring it back, you have that ability to test out or different manipulations, right? Obviously, the one about shark attacks is pretty obvious that it's not the case, but yeah, we had the example before. Remember, if you've done activity number 3, and the associations between Instagram and body dissatisfaction. Remember that one? If you've done it. So the idea is like female college students who use like Instagram would express higher body dissatisfaction. What could explain that? Well, there are different alternatives. So it could be that, yeah, like certain accounts caused body dissatisfaction. So the one I mentioned about like yoga trainers or something, they have like an extreme ideal of like extreme level of thin body ideal, right? Or like about fitness, or like about messages that are not realistic. Or it could be about a sense of isolation. So you see other people doing more cool stuff and getting more likes, which cause dissatisfaction overall, would then trickle down to body dissatisfaction as well. Or it could be the opposite. So there's this argument that people who just feel more isolated or more like have lower self-esteem or something would spend more time on Instagram, right? So that cannot establish causality in a qualitative research like interviews. In an experiment, that's what we mean by you can like try the different variables. So we can assign a group that use Instagram and just being exposed, let's say for 1 week, for those fitness models, right? And then we assign another group that would look into like different type of accounts. So like travel accounts. So yeah, so they would show you images from like Iceland, Tibet, the Caribbean islands, something. Yeah, those type of accounts. And then another would be about like raising children accounts, and another would be about like gaming accounts, and a fifth one would be about like foodies accounts, etc., etc. And so that's what we mean by ruling alternatives. So you would say if it is caused by body comparison, so the group that was exposed to the body trainers or like the fitness models should indicate the highest level of body dissatisfaction, right? So that's a hypothesis, right? And so with experimentation, that's what we mean. Like we could test different alternatives. We could control for external variables. So in an experiment, because many things happen if we just take a survey, like many things happen while you, for example, browse Instagram. You browse different accounts, or you go to different social media apps other than Instagram, or you do online shopping as well. And those would intervene with the effects. With the experiments, you could control for that, right? So that's what we mean by control conditions. So we have a large sample, and then we manipulate the variable we think would make the difference. Then we should observe the difference later. So you test different alternatives, and you could establish an observable direct link that's saying, look, those participants who were only shown the images of fitness models here, like 1 week later, and assuming we have a way to control what other content they cannot see. So just forget about that for a moment. 1 week later, we saw, like a higher level of body dissatisfaction, okay? So we established that link. You could see there's a logical connection between the things we manipulated and the outcome. right? We could control external variables, so what other manipulation the participants are to. You could discover the mechanism, right? So to remind you, we always say, I've always been saying that theories are not about saying X causes Y, but it's about why X causes Y. And so, like in biology, so when you say the theory of natural selection, does not tell you that one species like evolved from a different species. It's actually showing you the mechanism, right? So mutation and whatnot, then that caused that evolution or change, right? And it's the same thing when you're doing experimental research. It's not enough to say, yes, so you play more video games, you have more violent thoughts, but walk me through how that happened. What's the mechanism? So one video game, more like stimulation, more adrenaline levels, so you get like more aggressiveness. Is it about testosterone levels? Is it about sense of isolation, right? So if you isolate more yourself from social interpersonal contacts, you became like a more like aggressive person, like in terms of communication style, yeah, right? So that's by experiments you can control all of that, right? And I think in one class I mentioned that there were like a team of researchers when you say even if you play violent video games so in a group, so like you're in a room and you're playing with 3 other people and it's like a cooperative game, the effects on aggressive thoughts just are wiped out. Yeah, and so the idea is that it's not necessarily about the content of the game, it's about like the experience. And if it involves like being selfish and wanting to kill others, or like working on a team and just trying to win, which could actually mitigate any effects that have an aggressiveness or social aggressiveness in a matter, right? So that's like one example. So you're showing the mechanism, right? So is it about the exposure to the content? Is it about the style of the play? Is it about being in a group or not, et cetera, et cetera? So because it allows you to rule out alternative explanation, experiments are the only way, and I say this with some caution, the only way to establish causality is through experimentation, right? You do not establish causality via interviews. You do not establish causality via ethnographic research. The only way to establish causality is via experiments. Under some extreme circumstances, you can establish causality via like large-scale surveys, mostly in other fields. So smoking causes cancer, right? We don't know that by experiment. We just know that by observing real life cases, right? But because that effect was overwhelming, we can say, yeah, like, and we tried like in different population and whatnot, scientists were able to rule out alternative explanation, right? It could be about obesity, it could be about like workout habits, but because the amount of like the differences were so large, so significant across different population with different lifestyle, different diets, and different working environment, et cetera, it could only be attributed to smoking. In communication research, also we have a few things like that. Like when you say, for example, exposure to ads increases brand recall. Okay. Yeah, I mean, you can demonstrate that even by large-scale surveys, although you could do it by experiments, but experiments aren't really necessary that. But things more specific in general, experiments are the way to go if you want to show causality. Because of the third thing we talked about, ruling out alternative variables, which allow you to do those 6 things in here that would make that. And so the type of experiments we do are in communication. So you could have a communication variable changing a non-communication variable, or a non-communication variable affecting a communication variable. So for instance, frequency of using like social media would then affect purchase behavior. Okay, so using social media is a communication variable. Purchase behavior is a marketing variable, right? So that's one, communication to non-communication. It could be the opposite, right? So the one we said about some type of an attitude, a personality trait, or behavior affects your communication related activity. And so, for instance, for example, the one I gave last time, level of narcissism affects the frequency of posting selfies. Okay, so level of narcissism, this is just a psychology variable and affects posting selfies with a communication related variable, right? And then you could have two communication variables that are related. So you do like you visit more, or like for example, you follow more accounts by fashion influencers. You visit more online shopping websites, right? So your one online activity can be predicted by another online activity, right? Which are all both related to communication, right? Some of the terminology that then you have to be aware of before we talk about anything related to experimental research papers. So we talk about conditions or groups, we talk about manipulation, and then we talk about treatment condition and control condition, control group. A condition or a group, so in experiments, you always have to compare like two groups or like two conditions. Conditions and groups are used interchangeably. And so, yeah, to think about the most simple form, one group taking the vaccine, another group not taking the vaccine. Each one would constitute a condition. The one that are taking the vaccine are called the treatment condition. And yes, we are borrowing that from medical research. In the case of communication, let's say we're measuring our treatment or manipulation is exposure to one type of ads, right? And so I'm saying, for instance, that advertisements that use background music are more effective than advertisements that don't use background music, okay? So my manipulation is like, yeah, background music to advertisement. And so, the group that are going to see the advertisement with background music are called the treatment condition or the treatment group. And the one that is not is called the control group. And it's called the control group because we're controlling for that variable, right? Because if you want to see something, if you claim something is working, you have to compare it to its absence, right? If I say, yeah, advertisement with music, background music work more than the other group that did not see it. So I can attribute that improvement to my manipulation, right? So that changed, or in my case here, the advertisement would be the manipulation, right? So in research paper, that would be called the manipulation stimuli, that are the materials basically that the treatment condition is going to see. And it could be to range for a lot of things. It could be playing a game. It could be reading a piece of newspaper. It could be visiting a website. It could be about materials from social media. It could be about conducting interpersonal conversation. It could be about talking to a bot, etc., etc. So all of these visual, audio, pictures, etc., are called manipulation stimuli, right? And they are called conditions or groups because if it's two groups, hence we call it treatment versus control, or it could be one sample, but first they had a control condition, and then they were exposed to manipulation, and so they were in the treatment condition. Hence, we sometimes change the wording from group to condition if it's one group being exposed to different conditions, right? And so this is related then to how you conduct the experiment, right? And so it's something we would read in experimental research papers, something called random assignment. And the idea is in experimental research, you cannot, as a researcher, handpick or cherry pick which individual would belong to which group. So let's say I'm conducting an experiment about about some sort of a game. And so I just say, okay, Evelyn, Natalie, Kaylee would belong to group A. Kate, Maya, and Isabella would belong to group B. That's not like a random assignment. That would violate the premise of random assignment because the researcher is intervening. And so whatever effects we're going to see could be shadowed by the experimental choice of assigning whatever individual to which group. And the groups cannot only be chosen by the participants themselves, and so you cannot choose to be in the group that is going to see the ads versus the group that is not going to see the ad, right? And why is that? Why is random assignment necessary? So let me give an example. So let's pick one student. So let's see. My read, hi.
Hello.
May I ask you a question? Good morning. May I ask you a question? Can you tell me, do you have music app on your cell phone like Spotify or Pandora or any of these
Yes, yeah, I
apps?
Spotify.
Okay. Can you tell me like just one playlist you have or one singer, one album? Like who are you listening to?
Harry Styles.
Okay. Okay. So now, okay, let's say I have an experiment, right? Okay. And it's about the effect of playing background music on productivity in studying. And so, right, so if you're playing some sort of a music in the background or listening to it in your headphones, does it increase your productivity or not? Okay. And more than that, I'm arguing that it's about the genre of music that affects. Okay. So jazz, let's say, for example, is more effective than Harry Styles, or vice versa, right? If I let you pick which group you would belong to, would you pick the music you like or the music you dislike?
You'd pick the music that you like.
Right. So then if each group is choosing the music they like, okay, what would happen to my experiment in terms of the result?
It probably wouldn't give like accurate results because people are just choosing what they want to listen to instead of them being forced to listen to something.
Yeah, which mean my test would fail.
Yeah.
Yeah, so my whole experiment would fail because what's gonna happen is that I'm not actually testing the effect of the genre of music. I'm testing the effects of people's preferred type of music, right? So if group A choose their preferred type of music, group B did the same, then it's the whatever effects is due to people choosing the music they like and not the music, the type of music, the genre of music I'm hypothesizing about, right? If you pick your own playlist and then that's the thing you like, so the effects, whatever effects you're gonna see are the effects of the individual's preferred music on productivity in our case, right? But But if it's randomly assigned, so it's not biased by the researcher or the participants, what's gonna happen, so in the, let's say like jazz versus rock, so in the jazz condition, we would have people who like jazz and who dislike jazz and people in between. And in the rock music condition, we also have people who love rock, hate rock, and somewhere between. So if we see a difference between the two groups in the outcome, that is productivity, it will be attributed to the genre and not their own preference, right? Because the preferences were distributed randomly. They did not include, yeah, their own preference to bias the results, okay? And you can think about many different examples, right? So I say playing sports increases your concentration. And so, yeah, and then I bring in like 200 random students and I tell them, okay, choose if you want to play sports or not. And so people who are already playing sport would choose to continue playing sports. People who do not play sports would choose to continue not to play sports. And then at the end, I'll get the same results of whatever dependent variable I'm measuring, right? Because, yeah, people were choosing to do the things they like in the first place. So, yeah, but if I say, yeah, this change in sport exercises or sport habits is going to change the outcome, then, yeah, it has to be randomly assigned. So we'd have in each group, we'd have people who love sport, who hate sport, people who do a little bit, people who do who do a lot, people who do somewhere in between, right? So we distribute. This is what we mean by we control for external variables. We distribute our other characteristic equally between the conditions, and the only way to do it accurately is through random assignment, so it doesn't have bias from the researcher or the participants. And so that's what we mean by like, and why we do random assignment. Then we would have something called things called pre-test and post-test. And so let's start with the post-test. So this is simple. Post-test is about the dependent variable. I have my dependent variable is brand attitude, and then my independent variable is looking at sponsor post on Instagram. And so we would compare if you look at post by influencers versus post by the brand itself. And let's say we hypothesize that post by the influencers would lead to better brand attitude. Let's say the brand is Lululemon, for instance. So we would test that, obviously, after the manipulation, after people are exposed to the material set, because it's a dependent variable. If we measure it before, then there's no point, right? You already measured brand attitude and then you expose them. You want to see what's the change of group B versus group A. Or you could have more than 2 groups, by the way, but for sake of simplicity, I'm always comparing 2 groups, okay? So the post-test, you always have to have the dependent variable, the outcome variable, measured in the post-test. In the pre-test, it's a little bit more tricky. So sometimes you would measure the same variable twice. And so it would measure brand attitude, then do the experimentation, that is to say, like advertisement, and then you test it again, okay? Sometimes you don't need that if you have a control group, because if you have people who are not exposed to your independent variable, then yeah, you can just compare. You don't do it in the pre-test. But in the pre-test, what researchers do, you can measure other external variables. So let's say personality variables, or what we call subjective variables or individual differences. So people with, let's say you measure openness to experience, and let's say people high in openness to experience it could affect their attitude towards yoga-related brands, for instance, right? So that's the personality variable you measure before. And so later, when you conduct the post-test, you can also control for that. So let's see if any other personality variable has an effect, and then let's see if our manipulation would still have an effect, right? So in the pretest, what people would do, yeah, you measure some personality variables, control variables, which we're going to talk about more in details later. Then, and this is going to be, yeah, we're gonna latest slide for today. Then there's something called the factorial design, and this is important. So this is basically about how many conditions you're having in your experiments. So this could be, so the conditions are determined by your independent variable. If your variable has 2 levels, 3 levels, if you have 2 independent variables or just 1. And it could be what we call between subjects or within subject, between subjects and within subjects. And subject here means participants, so individual taking part in the experiments. So it could be that the example I gave, which is one group belonging to treatment condition and one group belonging to control condition. And so that's a between subjects design. So between 2 groups separately, right? It could be you have 1 independent variable, or it could be 2 independent variables. So the example I gave with my read, so it could be 1 independent variable could be the genre. Let's say we have 4 different genres. And then the other independent variable would be if you're listening on your headphones, or you're listening just from like the computer system, right? So that's the second independent variable, and it has 2 conditions. So I have 4 music genres, and then I have 2 conditions. This would be a 2x4 between subject design, because I will end up with 8 different conditions, right? I have 4 music genres, and each one I would have 1 with headphones versus no headphones, headphones versus no headphones, headphones versus no headphones, etc. So you will end up with 8 conditions in total. So when you would read such a research article, they would tell you we conducted a 4x2 between subject design, and then they would list what those factors are. Factors mean independent variables, right? The thing that causes something, we use that. It's a factor. So it's something that caused the other thing to change. So it's the X always. Within subject design, so it's the same subject, the same participant, is when you're using time as a factor, right? And so to stick with my example, it could be the same group of people. You let them study while they're listening to 1 genre of music or 1 playlist on Spotify. Then you take the test. Then you let them listen to another genre of music, another playlist, and then they take the test. You do it 3rd time, do it 4th time, whatever time you have. That would be called within subject design. So it's 1 group exposed to different conditions, right? And after each condition, you take the test for the dependent variable. Then you take another manipulation, another test, etc. There are different ways, like why we would pick between subject design or within subject design, that we're going to talk about later. But there's just the general idea. When you read this in an article, you understand what they're referring to. So within 1 group across time, between subject, 2 different groups. And it could be mixed, by the way. So it could be, for example, you let people listen to the same genre of music, and they alternate between listening on headphones versus listening from just the computer system. So the same group doing it either or. And then you compare it to another group who listen to another genre with headphones and without. So that's like would be a mixed between subject design within subject between subject within subject design, right? So the headphone thing was within, the genres were between. Okay, and so that's in general what we mean by that. So we're going to pause here and we'll give different example of experiments and why this issue about design and should people take a pre-test or not and how it affects the outcomes of the study, blah, blah, blah. Do you have questions? All right. Since that's the case, and let me know if you have questions about the final group project. Let me know. Yeah, send me email something or like talk to me in office hours.